Mission and margin is the business of healthcare. Larry Smith, Rachel Leyko, thank you so much for joining the business of healthcare.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
You've been an incredible advocate for the concept of early intervention. What is that?
It simply means that when there's an unexpected, unwelcomed outcome for a patient, we want to let them know right away that we're with them. And that's the beginning of a relationship that I hope is going to continue from that point forward, based on trust and based on communication and based on transparency. Then we start getting into harder issues, which is that this injury has now cost me something. It's cost me to get my family here because they live in California. We're on the East Coast, and I want to get my mom out here. I want to get my sister out here. I want to get somebody else, but I can't afford it. We don't have that kind of money. So we can actually help get the family to the bedside, and even though we don't have any understanding at this point of whether it's our responsibility or whether it's an adverse outcome that we could do nothing to prevent. That doesn't matter in that first early intervention stage. And if you do it on the basis of only working with patients where you know you've screwed up, I think you're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes we can identify that we did something or didn't do something that we should have done that resulted or could have resulted in the harm the patient's experienced. If you're truly going to do this program, you're going to share that with the patient, and that's a hard conversation to have. I'm putting the risk of the organization at some risk when we start having those conversations. In essence, I'm admitting liability in some cases before I even hear from a lawyer. They also want to know what happens now. You know, what can I do? Is there treatment? Is there something that I can expect? And we want that information. We've got a very large healthcare system with every specialty known to mankind. So even within MedStar, we have enough resources to take care of anything that might happen to a patient. Because of the work that we do, we have seen instances where patients get medical care and treatment that they otherwise might not get for years through the litigation process.
One of the things that you've talked about with early intervention is the importance of governance.
Yes.
And the support you've received across the organization.
We have a captive insurance company. And I always kid that the board and the leadership have given me the keys to the vault. I can open the captive vault anytime I need to and take money out to be able to support the issues I just talked about. You know, hotel bills are not that expensive, but we've done things like buy electric wheelchairs, buy a wheelchair van for a patient who's needed that during this conversation that's going on sometimes for months. All the work we do that I've just described is done without any releases being signed. I'm not asking patients to waive anything. We don't ask them to forgive us, legally. We just say, let's do this, and we'll figure it out later on, down the road. If they sue us, they sue us. And all I've done, I hope, is establish a relationship with them, but that means that we're not going to be in a position, even in litigation, where we have to be bitter adversaries. And I am blessed. I've talked to a number of captive leaders, and I'm blessed because my board is made up of members of the MedStar board, so the lay members of the board who run MedStar, who are responsible for MedStar as a nonprofit organization. A couple of them sit on the board, on the captive board. The C-suite is well represented on my captive board. So we started the discussion really at the captive board level, saying, I would like to do more of this, and I want to describe what this is. And so we'd go into discussion. And there was some discomfort because we're taking risk. This is not the way that most programs operate in a litigation environment. And Maryland and DC both are hot litigation environments. So doing this work was a difference. So my point is that what I needed to have in order to do this successfully was support by the board, support by the senior leadership at the C-suite, operational leadership understanding what we were trying to accomplish and support me. And I am very blessed to have that support all the way through. But often lawyers will call me when they get the calls from patients to go through this process and say, I don't know what you did before the patient got to me, but they love you guys. But they still want to sue you. They still think they have a right to compensation. But I think we can work this out without getting into litigation. Can we sit down and talk and see how we can do it?
And Rachel, you in your career, prior to working at MedStar, you worked for a law firm. And you actually had, while that firm generally represented defense, you had some experiences with those plaintiffs, with those victims or those that have suffered harm.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
One of the main reasons that brought folks into the firm was because they were angry, because after an event happened or an unexpected outcome or they were injured, everyone sort of left them and wouldn't talk to them anymore or would not answer their questions. And so they were left feeling unsure about what happened, in a very vulnerable state and worried about what was going to happen next. And so they would come to the firm to say, I don't know what went wrong, but I'm angry and I want to sue this physician or this hospital because now I'm in a wheelchair, or I was out of work for 6 months because I had this surgical complication. And they would come to us, we would investigate it, and we would give them the answer. And I worked for a very respectable attorney at the time. And many times we would say, this was a complication, you can't sue. But we would at least give them an answer, and they were grateful for that because they weren't getting it from anyone else. But on occasion, we would uncover that the hospital or the provider did something or did not do something that they should have that resulted in the injury, and then the patient would sue, and it would just become a very antagonistic process with the patient being very angry, the healthcare system putting up their defenses, and it was a long, drawn-out process to get somebody resources that they needed right after the event. So the recovery ends up being longer and more intensive, and there's just a lot of anger that builds. So with the early intervention program, you can work with the patient at the beginning to get them what they need. And it changes the conversation when you finally get to the point where they might sue, or when you're sitting down to a table for mediation. It's more of a collaborative, at times, process. That doesn't make it an easy process.
Right.
We certainly have had difficult times with patients who we have disclosed this to, but it's the right thing to do, I think.
The transition for you transitioned from law firm into MedStar.
Yes.
What led you to do that?
I was in the middle of finishing my master's degree in health systems management, and I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. And if you stay at a law firm, you're either going to be a paralegal or you're going to be a lawyer, and I didn't want to go to law school. It's just not my cup of tea. So I needed to figure out something else to do in my career, but I loved medical malpractice claims. For whatever reason, I just love the analysis that goes into it and figuring out. It's almost like a mystery, right? When somebody comes in and says, well, what happened? Let's dig in. And you just uncover all these things. So I loved analyzing the facts and figuring out what we're going to do, what experts we needed to get involved, and working up that litigation piece. But I did not want to be a lawyer. So MedStar was one of our clients when we were a defense firm, and I saw that they had a position and sort of put feelers out, and then Lary ended up reaching out.
And you,
we'd worked together for a few.
I knew she was out there.
Yeah.
And I knew I heard that she might be interested in leaving Brian's firm. Brian, her boss then, was a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And Brian said, you know what, it'd be a great opportunity for her. And he is a great guy. It would be a great opportunity for her. I know what you guys do. He knew our work. He was defense counsel for us. And I know what she does and what she can do, and I think it would be a great match. So he encouraged it. We made her an offer, and she's been there ever since.
Is there a different generational perspective as it relates to the idea of early intervention?
I've not had a lot of experience outside of MedStar. I was with the law firm for 6 or 7 years, and then I've been with MedStar for 7 years now.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of perspective for other organizations or working with other folks. But Brian, my old boss, he would say, well, why the heck wouldn't they have talked to this guy when we would get a MedStar claim before it got to this point? Because it didn't need to get here. Right. So I think maybe people see that in claims, and maybe they just didn't speak up about it. I think we have an organization that is progressive and wants to hear things like that. Like, what can we do differently to make sure that we're here 10, 20, 30 years from now?
And Rachel, in our earlier conversation, pointed out how important you are as a mentor to her. Is she ever a mentor to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Being a mentor, I think, has got nothing to do with either age or experience. It just has to do whether you have something to offer. And Rachel has so much to offer. I go to her very often. I consider her to be in the group of my moral compasses out there. There are times when I have to go to somebody and say, I'm sitting on the horns of a dilemma. And I typically like to describe myself as somebody who does the right thing. But sometimes doing the right thing is not easy to identify because there are so many complications associated with choices. So I go to Rachel and say, so this is what's going on. What do you think? And when I ask that question, it isn't a rhetorical question. It's an honest question. I want to know, what do you think? Given I trust you, and I watch you work, I watch you think, I watch what you do, and I want to hear your advice. And so, yeah, very much so. She's a mentor, in addition to being a good mentee.
As my boss, he's wonderful and listens and can be hard when he needs to be hard. I don't know how else to explain that. You know, if I come to him with an issue and he's like, well, why are you doing it that way? He helps me think through how a better way might be. And then, you know, as far as the mentor-mentee relationship goes, he's very good at listening to whatever problem I might be having, whether it's with relating with another person on our team or communicating with another person on our team, or some frustration with how something at MedStar is working and how I need to work with those people to resolve whatever it is. He is wonderful at helping me think that through and help me step up to be seen as a leader, and with that comes a whole different set of responsibilities that are new to me and that I have been learning as I've gone through that.
Have you gotten to a point where you've accumulated enough evidence to argue the business case
It's a great
that it's
question.
the right thing to do?
Well, what we have seen, though, with the data that I think begins to build the business case is that anecdotally, on some of the larger events we've had this early intervention program, I know that we have paid less ultimately in resolving the case than we would have in a litigation environment. But we don't do it for that purpose. And also doesn't mean that we are taking away from patients resources that they deserve. But I've had a couple of lawyers in big cases. Now the lawyers get involved, the patients were part of the process, now they've got counsel. And literally one of the lawyers said to me, when we had a very bad outcome, a very expensive case, I would normally be going after you for a lot more money than what I'm going after you for. And I know I've got you nailed on liability. But the family really respects the way you approach them after this event. And all they want is what they consider to be appropriate compensation and taking care of their family going forward. And if we can work that out, we're gonna have a deal. And within a couple of phone calls, not even a mediation, we had a deal. And so I think if we can learn how to do the work we're doing and appropriately compensate the families and the patients for the harm that's been caused when it's our responsibility, I do think there's a business case for that works for both of us, both for the patients and for the hospital. Remember, the patients are getting this money early rather than waiting for years through the litigation process to get the money, so they can actually start using it to help themselves deal with the issues they're dealing with. And I think that's, for me, I think that's a remarkable benefit.
Rachel, you've been playing an instrumental role in gathering the data to begin to build the evidence-based case that early intervention makes a difference. What can you say now based on what you've seen in the data?
We do have some data to show that we are spending less on resolving claims than we have in the past, because we take the anger away from the patient before entering into a discussion with them. And as Larry has said, anger does cost something, and so we're taking that away, and so we're better able to have conversation with them. I think on an aggregate basis we're not there yet, but on a case-by-case basis we can speak to early intervention being a great case for business and building that relationship with the patient and ultimately having lower costs on the claim side. We're still collecting some data on the bill waiver piece of our early intervention program and working with our finance team and combining that so we have a true understanding of what the business costs and risk and benefit are.
From your perspective in working as a stakeholder in healthcare, is doing the right thing important here to you?
Yes.
Talk about that.
You always have to do the right thing. It's not easy, and it's certainly hard, and the conversations that we have to have with a patient are incredibly difficult conversations to have, but it's the right thing to do. You know, you think about, what if it was your loved one who has suffered in an event like this? How would you want them to be treated?
When harm occurs, there's another victim, and that's the provider.
Yes.
And we also happen to be in a world where physician burnout is a super important issue.
Yes.
How does early intervention play out to the clinicians that you've worked with?
Oh, huge. Listen, my approach to this started very early in my career. You know, when I was a young, impressionable mentee, one of the things that happened was a good friend of mine was a cardiologist and ended up with a death. He's an interventional cardiologist, ended up with a death on the cath lab that he caused. It was a perforation that he caused. And in retrospect, he realized that there's some things he could have done differently. And what he did, however, after that death, was to go to the family and spend time with them. He explained what happened, took responsibility, sat with the family. It was a big Italian family, And he sat down with them and spent hours in the hospital after the death, just commiserating with them, crying, quite frankly, with them. I got a call from a lawyer within months, and he said, I'm going to file suit in connection with this death case, but I've got a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, I'm going to name everybody that was in the room except for this guy that was doing the cath, because the family loves him and they can't sue him. I said, if you do that, you know you can't be successful. There's no negligence on the part of anyone else in the room.
Right.
He said, I know it. He said, but I can't get them to do it. Would you be willing to settle with me if we just sit down and get this done? Because they deserve some compensation.
Yeah.
I think it's important that folks in a healthcare organization see that we're doing this work. Because I do believe most folks come to work in healthcare because they want to do good. In fact, one of the doctors involved in one of our biggest events said, I'm so thankful that this event that I was involved in happened here. Because in any other organization, I might have been told to run and hide. And here I was asked to pitch in and help.
Larry Smith, Rachel Leyko, thank you so much for joining the business of healthcare today.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
To watch, listen, or read other BOH interviews, visit bohseries.com